I discovered my father's affair and the secrets that shattered my family. Reddit stories. In the small town of Eldridge, where secrets were as common as the rolling hills, everyone knew everyone else's business. But there were some things better left unsaid. At least, that's what Lila had always been taught. She grew up with the understanding that family was sacred, a unit that should never be torn apart by gossip or the uglier sides of life. But as the years went on, those unspoken truths began to weigh heavily on her heart. Lila was the youngest of 3 children. Her older brother Max was the perfect son, smart-driven, always willing to do whatever it took to make their parents proud. He was the one their mother would always talk about, with that certain gleam in her eye, the pride almost palpable in her voice whenever he visited. He was everything that Lila, in her quiet and introspective way, never quite felt she could be. Then there was Claire, Lila's older sister, who had always been the rebellious one. Where Max fit into the mold of what their parents wanted, Claire shattered it. She wore dark eyeliner and heavy boots, with a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. She never fit in with their tight-knit family, and she wore her defiance like armor. She was the one who had left Eldridge the moment she turned 18, moving to the city to escape the suffocating confines of their small-town life. They didn't hear much from her after that, save for the occasional postcard or a short phone call on her birthday. And then there was Lila, the quiet observer, the one who noticed everything but said very little. She watched her parents from the sidelines, observed their reactions to her siblings, and spent countless hours inside her own head, wondering where she fit into all of it. Her parents, well-intentioned as they were, never really understood her. They always seemed to want more from her, more ambition, more confidence, more success. But Lila had always been content with simply being. Her relationship with her father, David, was one of unspoken understanding. He didn't demand anything from her. Instead, he quietly supported her from the background, always there when she needed him. It was her mother, Carol, who was the forceful presence in their family, a woman who saw potential in everyone but often overlooked what was right in front of her. For years, Lila had silently yearned for her mother's approval, but that approval always seemed to be just out of reach. The tension had always simmered beneath the surface, and while Lila had accepted that, there was always this gnawing feeling in the back of her mind that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until her father's unexpected death that the cracks in their family's facade began to widen, revealing secrets that no one had been prepared for. David had been in good health, or so they all thought. His sudden heart attack caught everyone off guard, shattering the calm of their otherwise routine lives. Lila, as the closest to him, had taken on the responsibility of handling everything. She arranged the funeral, took care of the paperwork, and managed the house in the wake of his death. It was during this time that she discovered a box tucked away in the attic, one that she had never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each one written in her father's neat, precise handwriting. At first, she didn't know what to make of them. But as she began to read, the truth became clear. The letters weren't to her mother, or to any family member for that matter. They were addressed to a woman named Evelyn. The name meant nothing to Lila, but as she sifted through the pages, her heart began to race. The letters spoke of a love affair, one that had taken place years before Lila had been born. They spoke of a relationship that had been secret, hidden from everyone, including her mother. The love that her father had felt for Evelyn was undeniable, and it was clear from the letters that it had been a deep, passionate connection that he had never been able to let go of. The discovery rocked Lila to her core. She had always thought her father as a man of integrity, someone who had always done right by his family. But now, this image was shattered. Her father had been living a double life, one that he had kept hidden for over 20 years. It was almost as if the man she thought she knew had been a stranger all along. What troubled her more than anything was the realization that her mother, Carol, had known about it. She had known and yet she had stayed silent. There was no sign of anger, no confrontation, no acknowledgement of the betrayal. Carol had never mentioned Evelyn, never once brought up the affair. Instead, she had carried on as if nothing had changed. It was as if the entire family was complicit in the silence, pretending that everything was as it had always been. Lila's mind raced with questions. Why hadn't her mother confronted her father? Why had she stayed with him all these years, knowing the truth? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why had her father never told her about Evelyn? Was there something deeper behind the secrets he had kept? Something that went beyond the affair itself? Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, Lila reached out to her siblings. She called Max, her voice trembling as she told him about the letters she had found. Max, ever the protector, was quick to dismiss the idea. "It's just some old letters, Lila," he said. "You're making too much of this." But Lila wasn't convinced. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her, and she knew that her father's secrets were far from simple. Claire, on the other hand, reacted differently. She had always been the wild card, the one who had distanced herself from the family in the past. But when Lila reached out to her, the response was immediate. Claire came back to Eldridge, her defiance now replaced with an eerie calmness. She didn't offer any explanations, didn't speak of the past, but there was something about her presence that made Lila uneasy. She had changed in ways that Lila couldn't quite understand. As the days went on, Lila found herself unraveling the mystery of her family's past, piece by piece. But with each revelation, the truth became more complicated, more difficult to comprehend. It wasn't just her father's affair that had torn them apart. It was the web of lies, the silence, and the unspoken truths that had been buried for so long. The family she had grown up with, the family she had always trusted, was not what it seemed. Now, with her father gone and the weight of his secrets threatening to destroy everything, Lila found herself at a crossroads. She could either continue to live in the shadow of her father's lies, or she could confront the truth head-on. But as she stared at the letters, the words on the page blurred by her tears, she realized that some truths, no matter how painful, could never be buried forever. And with that realization came the most terrifying thought of all. What if the biggest secret of all wasn't about her father, but about her own place in this tangled web of family and deception? She had to know. She had to find out the truth, no matter what it cost her. But in doing so, she might just uncover something that would change everything forever. The days following the discovery of her father's letters were a blur. Lila tried to maintain some semblance of normality, but it was impossible. She felt like she was walking through a fog, her mind consumed with the weight of what she had uncovered. Her father, the man she had always revered, had been living a lie. And now, in the silence of the house that had once felt like home, she could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Max's dismissal of her discovery haunted her. He had always been the practical one, the one who relied on logic and reason, and he couldn't understand why Lila was so affected by the letters. To him, it was just an old story, something that happened long before any of them were born. He had no interest in digging up the past, especially when it came to their father. Max was more concerned with moving on, keeping the family's reputation intact, and preserving the image of the perfect family they had worked so hard to build. But Lila couldn't do that. She couldn't ignore what she had found. She needed to know the full truth, even if it meant shattering the fragile illusion that had kept their family together all these years. Claire, on the other hand, was a different story. Lila hadn't seen her sister in years, but when Claire came back to Eldridge, it was clear that something had changed. Claire's arrival felt like a storm had rolled into town. Her presence was loud, unapologetic, and filled with a tension that Lila couldn't ignore. It was as if Claire had always known something that the rest of them hadn't. She walked into their father's house with an air of familiarity, as though she had never really left. And in a way, perhaps she hadn't. Claire had always been the one who saw through the facades, the one who refused to pretend that everything was perfect. The conversation that followed was inevitable. Lila had to know what Claire thought about their father's affair, about Evelyn, about everything. She couldn't keep it inside any longer. So, one evening after dinner, Lila confronted her sister. "Claire," Lila began, her voice trembling slightly, "do you know about Evelyn? About what Dad did?" Claire didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she took a slow sip from her wine glass before responding. "I knew," Claire said flatly, her eyes meeting Lila's. "I've known for a long time." Lila's heart stopped. "What do you mean you knew? How? Why didn't you ever tell me?" Claire sighed, placing her glass down gently on the table. "It wasn't my place to tell you," she replied, her voice distant, almost resigned. "It's not like Dad ever talked about it. Hell, I don't even think Mom knew for sure, but I could see it. I could feel the tension, the way Dad looked at her. I wasn't blind." Lila stared at her sister, trying to process the words. "So, you just let it go. You let him keep it a secret, let Mom live in the dark." Claire leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "What was I supposed to do, Lila? Dad wasn't a bad person. He made a mistake, sure. But people aren't perfect. Everyone has their flaws. We've all got our baggage. Some of us just deal with it in different ways." Lila shook her head, feeling a surge of anger rise within her. "But that's not the point. He lied to us. He lied to Mom. He kept something like that hidden from us, and we're just supposed to pretend it didn't matter." Claire's gaze softened, but there was no apology in her eyes. "I get it, I do. It's hard. But sometimes the truth is messy. Sometimes it's easier to just leave things as they are. Besides, what good would it have done to drag all this up? What would it change?" Lila's thoughts swirled in confusion. She didn't know if she was angry at Claire for her indifference or at herself for not seeing it sooner. But the more Claire spoke, the more Lila realized that her sister had a point. There was something about their family, something that made them avoid confrontation, avoid uncomfortable truths. Maybe it was easier to just let things slide, to let the past fade into obscurity. But for Lila, it was never that simple. She couldn't ignore the hole that had been left in the fabric of their family, a hole that seemed to have deepened with each passing day. "I can't just ignore it, Claire," Lila said quietly. "I need to understand why. Why did he do it? Why did he hide it from us?" Claire's expression shifted, a flicker of something akin to sadness crossing her face. "Maybe you don't need to know the why. Maybe it's just the way things were. People make mistakes. We all do." Lila felt a deep sense of frustration. How could Claire be so calm about it? How could she accept it so easily? Lila had always thought of her sister as the one who would stand up for what was right, the one who would demand answers, demand accountability. But now, Claire seemed so far removed from the person Lila had once known. "I can't just let it go," Lila said firmly. "I need to know more. I need to find Evelyn." Claire's eyes widened. "Lila, no. Don't do that. You're only going to get hurt, Dot." "I have to," Lila replied, her voice steady. "I have to understand everything. I have to know what was really going on." The next few days were a blur of emotions and unanswered questions. Lila couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something dangerous, something that could change everything. She found herself searching for Evelyn's name online, hoping for some clue, some trace of the woman her father had loved before her mother. There were no records, no social media profiles, nothing that could point her in the right direction. But she couldn't give up. She couldn't stop. It wasn't until a chance encounter at the local diner that Lila finally got a lead. She had gone there for a cup of coffee, trying to clear her head, when she overheard a conversation between two of the town's older residents. They were talking about her father, about the past, and they mentioned Evelyn's name. Lila's ears perked up, and she couldn't resist listening in. "She was always such a sweet thing," one of the women said. But she was never really one of us. That's why David kept it all so quiet. People around here don't forget things like that. They never did. The other woman nodded. I heard she went off to Chicago. Changed her name, started a new life. Lila's heart raced. Chicago. That was the lead she needed. She knew then that she had to go there, to find Evelyn and confront her with the truth. But as she drove out of Eldridge, leaving behind the town that had shaped her family, Lila couldn't help but wonder if finding Evelyn would bring the answers she sought, or if it would simply pull her deeper into a web of lies and secrets that might destroy her family forever. Lila arrived in Chicago with a heavy heart, the weight of her father's secrets pressing down on her like an unshackable burden. It had only been a few days since she left Eldridge, but already the distance felt endless. The city was nothing like the quiet, familiar streets of her hometown. Here everything seemed louder, faster, and more chaotic. But it wasn't the noise or the crowds that occupied her mind. It was the woman she had come to find. Evelyn. Lila's search began with the address she had found scrawled on a crumpled piece of paper. The name of a small apartment complex in a nondescript part of the city. Evelyn had lived here once, decades ago, but whether she still did was another question. Lila had no idea what she was walking into, only that she had to know the truth, no matter how much it cost her. The apartment complex was older, its walls weathered by time and the elements. The paint on the doors had chipped away, and the smell of dust lingered in the air. Lila walked through the halls with cautious steps, her eyes scanning the names on the mailboxes as she passed. She didn't know if Evelyn still lived here, but something told her that, if she was going to find any trace of her father's past, this was where she had to start. It wasn't until she reached the end of the hall that she saw a name that made her heart skip a beat. Evelyn Carter. The name was still there, though faded with time. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the doorbell. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was here, she felt unprepared, uncertain. What would she even say? How would she begin to ask about her father, about the past that had been hidden from her for so long? Before she could gather the courage to ring the bell, the door opened. An older woman stood in the doorway, her expression one of surprise but not shock. She was dressed in simple clothes, her graying hair tied back into a loose bun. Her eyes were sharp, as if she had been waiting for something or someone for a long time. Yes, the woman asked, her voice soft but firm. Lila's heart raced. She opened her mouth to speak, but found that her voice had deserted her. She could barely remember the words she had rehearsed in her head for the past few days. Finally, she managed to say, "Are you Evelyn Carter?" The woman nodded slowly, studying Lila with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I am. What can I help you with?" Lila took a deep breath. I'm Lila, Lila Davis. My father, David Davis, was your lover. He's dead now. He passed away recently, and I found some letters that he wrote to you. I need to know what happened. I need to understand everything." Evelyn's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Lila could see the flicker of something painful pass across her face. The woman stepped aside, gesturing for Lila to come in. "Come in," Evelyn said quietly. "We have a lot to talk about." But Lila entered the apartment, her pulse racing with a mixture of excitement and dread. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but this place, this apartment, felt like a step into another world. The walls were covered in photographs, some faded with age, others vibrant and full of life. There were no signs of the kind of disarray one might expect from someone living in the past. Instead, everything was meticulously arranged. There was a quiet orderliness to the room, and it felt like Evelyn had carefully curated her life to keep the past at bay. Evelyn led Lila to the small dining table by the window where they both sat down. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. The air between them was thick with the unspoken questions that hovered like a shadow. "David," Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper, "was always a complicated man. But he wasn't a bad man. He was kind, generous, and well, he loved me. He loved me in a way I hadn't ever been loved before. Lila's heart tightened as she listened. She had known that her father had been a good man, but hearing it from Evelyn made it real in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had always seen her father as someone who held the family together, someone whose love for her mother was unwavering. But here, in Evelyn's apartment, that image of her father was shattering. "He never told you?" Evelyn asked, her gaze piercing. Lila shook her head. "No, he never spoke of you. Not once. I didn't even know you existed." Evelyn nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "David and we had something special. It wasn't something he could easily walk away from, but he did. He had to, his family, for his reputation. And he never looked back. But I couldn't let go of him. I couldn't just erase him from my life." Lila could feel her stomach churn. She had never considered that side of her father. To her, he had always been a man who put family first, a man who had made sacrifices for the people he loved. The idea that he had kept this other life, this other love, hidden was almost too much to bear. "But why?" Lila asked, her voice shaky. "Why did he leave you? Why didn't he stay with you?" Evelyn looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "It wasn't that simple, Lila. He loved you, you know? He loved his family. But he was torn. He was torn between two worlds. And in the end, he chose the life he thought was the right one. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He didn't want to destroy his family, his reputation. And so, he walked away from me." The words hit Lila like a physical blow. Her father, the man she had always admired, had made a choice. One that had left Evelyn broken, and one that had irrevocably changed the course of all their lives. And in the end, it was a decision that had been made long before Lila had ever been born. But Evelyn's story didn't end there. She leaned in, her expression turning more serious. "There's something you need to know, Lila. Something your father never told you. And it's something that might change everything you thought you knew about him." Lila's breath caught in her throat. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the anticipation building with every passing second. "What is it?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to share the truth. "David never left me because he didn't want to be with me. He left because he had to. You see, there was another woman, someone he was involved with after he left me. She was pregnant, and David made a choice. He chose to stay with his family, to raise that child as his own." Lila's head spun. What do you mean? Who?" Evelyn's eyes met Lila's, and for the first time, Lila saw something that was almost painful in the older woman's gaze. "Lila, the woman he left me for was your mother." Lila's mind went blank. The room seemed to tilt, and she had to steady herself on the table. The world she had known, the family she had spent her whole life trying to understand, had just crumbled before her eyes. Her father's love for Evelyn, his betrayal, his choice to walk away, all of it had been for her mother. Everything she thought she knew about her family, the perfect family, the one she had always believed in, was a lie. Her father's secret life, the affair, the pregnancy, and the woman he had chosen, it had all been part of a much larger story that Lila had never imagined. As the truth sunk in, Lila felt a deep, overwhelming sense of loss. Not just for the father she had loved, but for the life she had thought she understood. Nothing was what it seemed. And in this moment, she realized that she had only begun to uncover the depth of the secrets that had shaped her family. But the more she learned, the more she realized that the answers she sought might not bring the peace she had been hoping for. Instead, they could destroy everything she had ever known. Evelyn's voice broke through her thoughts. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you deserve to know the truth. David never stopped loving you, Lila, but he had to live with the consequences of his choices. And so did I." Lila stared at Evelyn, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, she understood the complexity of her father's life, the choices that had led him to make the decisions he had. But she also knew that the truth she had uncovered was just the beginning. There was more to this story, more to her family's past. And as much as it hurt, Lila knew she had to keep going, because the truth, no matter how painful, had to be faced, even if it tore everything apart. Lila's mind raced as she left Evelyn's apartment. The words she had heard reverberated in her mind, each one harder to swallow than the last. Her father, the man she had idolized her entire life, had lived a double life, one of love, loss, and secrecy. The woman she had thought of as just her mother was entwined in a story that Lila couldn't even begin to fully understand. And now, Evelyn, the woman who had been left behind, had opened up a new chapter of her family's history, one that no one had ever spoken of. The more she thought about it, the more questions kept bubbling to the surface. Her father's affair with Evelyn had been secret, yes, but the affair with Lila's mother, Carol, had been the real bombshell. The fact that her father had been torn between two women and had made the ultimate choice to leave Evelyn for Carol was both tragic and, in a way, heroic. He had wanted to do the right thing, to be a father to Lila, to provide her with the stable, secure life he thought she deserved. And yet, in his attempt to create that life, he had torn apart another, leaving Evelyn in the wake of his choices. But the most unsettling part was the revelation that her mother had never known the full extent of what had happened between David and Evelyn. Carol had never known that the love of her life had once been torn between her and another woman. She had never known that her husband had made a decision, not just to stay with her, but to choose her over the woman who had meant something to him before they had even met. Evelyn had been part of her father's past, but Carol had been the one he had built his life with. Lila couldn't shake the thought of her mother, Carol, living with this hidden truth for so many years, never once confronting it. Did she know, or had she chosen to live in blissful ignorance? Was she aware that Lila's father had kept secrets from her, just as he had kept secrets from Lila? Or had Carol, like everyone else, simply allowed the silence to persist, afraid of what might happen if the truth ever came to light? The drive back to Eldridge felt longer than it had ever been before. The familiar landscape seemed distant, as though Lila was no longer a part of it. The small town that had always been home now felt suffocating, its secrets closing in on her from every direction. She needed answers, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what those answers might reveal. Every step she had taken so far had only led to more questions, more mysteries, and more lies. And yet, she knew she couldn't stop. She couldn't turn away from the truth. When she arrived back in Eldridge, the house felt empty. Her father was gone, and now, for the first time, Lila felt the weight of that absence in a way that was more profound than she had ever imagined. The house that had once been filled with the hum of family life, the quiet comfort of her father's presence, now seemed hollow and silent. She walked through the rooms, touching the objects that had once seemed so ordinary. His old chair, the family photographs on the walls, and felt a deep ache in her chest. Everything had changed. Everything was different now. She found herself standing in front of the attic door, the place where she had discovered her father's letters to Evelyn. It was almost as if the attic had become a portal to her father's past, a past she had never known. She hadn't gone back up there since that day, but now she couldn't ignore the pull. The answers were in that box filled with letters that her father had never shared with anyone. There was more to be uncovered, more to understand. She had to go back. She had to know everything. The attic was dimly lit, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of old wood. Lila's footsteps echoed as she climbed the stairs, her heart racing. The box was still there, sitting quietly in the corner, just as it had been when she first discovered it. She opened it slowly, the sound of the cardboard creaking under her fingers. Inside, the letters were neatly stacked, tied together with a faded ribbon. She carefully untied it, feeling the weight of the words that were contained within. She pulled out the first letter and began to read. David's words were almost painfully intimate. revealing a side of him she had never seen. The letters were filled with longing, regret, and a deep love for Evelyn. He spoke of their time together, the moments they had shared, and the promises they had made to each other. And yet, within the letters, there was also the acknowledgement of the impossibility of their situation. David had known that he couldn't have both women, that he couldn't continue living this double life. The choice he had made to stay with Carol, to build a family with her, was not an easy one. It had come at the cost of his own happiness, and in many ways, it had cost him Evelyn, too. As Lila read through the letters, she began to see her father in a new light. He wasn't the perfect man she had always believed him to be. He was flawed, complex, and deeply human. He had made mistakes, just like anyone else. But in those mistakes, there had been love, genuine, raw love, that Lila could now understand, even if it had come at a great cost. The last letter in the box was different from the others. It wasn't addressed to Evelyn, but to Lila. It was dated just a few months before his death. Lila could hardly breathe as she read the words written in her father's familiar hand. "My dearest Lila, I know that one day you will find these letters, and when you do, I hope you will understand why I never shared them with you. I made the choice to keep my past hidden because I wanted to protect you. I wanted you to see me as your father, the man who loved you and your mother, and not as the man who made mistakes along the way. But now, with everything that's happened, I realize that I cannot continue to hide the truth from you. You deserve to know it all. I only hope that you can forgive me for the things I've kept from you. I never wanted to hurt you or your mother, but in my attempts to protect you, I may have done just that. Please know that I loved you always. Dad." Lila's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter. Her father had written to her, knowing that his secrets would one day be uncovered. He had known that his past would come to light, and he had left these letters behind as a way of explaining himself. But what did it mean? What was she supposed to do with all of this? Could she forgive him for the lies, the secrecy, the pain he had caused? The answer wasn't clear, and Lila wasn't sure it ever would be. But one thing was certain. She could no longer live in ignorance. The truth was out, and now there was no going back. As she stood in the attic, holding the letters in her hands, Lila realized that her journey was far from over. She still had questions. She still had more to uncover. But she was no longer afraid to face the truth, no longer afraid of what it might reveal. And perhaps in time, she would come to terms with it all. The love, the betrayal, the loss, and find a way to move forward. Not just as the daughter of David Davis, but as her own person, unburdened by the secrets of the past. The days following Lila's discovery in the attic felt surreal. The letters she had uncovered had changed everything, and she wasn't sure how to make sense of the pieces that had been scattered across her life. She had always known her father as a strong, dependable figure, someone who had always put family first, someone who had provided for her, protected her, and loved her in his own quiet way. But the reality of who he had been, who he had loved, and the choices he had made had cracked that image wide open, leaving Lila with more questions than answers. As the days stretched on, she found herself drifting between a need to understand and an overwhelming urge to leave it all behind. The truth she had uncovered felt both empowering and devastating. She had always prided herself on being someone who could handle the truth, no matter how difficult it was. But this truth, the truth about her father's secret past, was something entirely different. It was a truth that tugged at the very foundation of her identity, challenging everything she had ever believed. Her mother, Carol, had been absent for most of the day, which gave Lila the perfect opportunity to reflect on the silence that had settled between them. Lila had barely spoken to her since she returned from Chicago. Her mother, for all her apparent strength, had not once mentioned the past, not once alluded to the affair that had once defined the tension between David and Evelyn. It was as though Carol had chosen to bury it all, just as she had buried so much else in her life. Lila had always believed that her mother was the steady anchor in the family. Carl was the one who held everything together, the one who never faltered, never let anything break their perfect family image. But now Lila wasn't sure how much of that image had been real. How much had been a carefully crafted illusion, and how much of that illusion had been sustained by her mother's own silence. Lila knew that she had to confront her mother. There could be no more hiding, no more pretending that everything was fine. It was time to face the truth, even if that truth would tear everything apart. When Carol came home later that evening, Lila didn't waste any time. She had waited long enough. She couldn't wait for the perfect moment, the perfect words. This had to happen now. "Mom," Lila said, her voice steady but firm. "Oh, we need to talk." Carol paused, her hand on the doorframe as she stepped inside. There was something in Lila's voice, something resolute, that made her stop. Carol's expression shifted from one of tired indifference to one of cautious curiosity. She closed the door behind her and turned to face Lila. "About what?" Carol asked, her tone neutral but guarded. "About Dad." "About," the replied, her eyes never leaving her mother's. "About everything." Carol's face paled slightly, and for a moment, Lila thought she might say something. Something that would explain everything, something that would make all the confusion and pain disappear. But instead, Carol looked away, as if trying to escape the weight of the words. "I don't know what you mean," Carol said softly, but Lila could hear the tremor in her voice. "There's nothing to talk about. Your father is gone. Let him rest in peace." "No," Lila said, her voice rising. "There's everything to talk about. I found the letters, Mom. I found out about Evelyn, about what happened between them, about what happened with you and Dad." For the first time in the conversation, Carol's gaze met Lila's, but it wasn't with the comforting warmth that Lila had always relied on. It was cold, distant, as though Carol had already shut herself off from the conversation, from Lila herself. "Lila," Carol began, her voice low, almost too calm. "Your father made his choices. He made them for us. For you. He did what he thought was best." Lila's heart ached. Her mother's words sounded rehearsed, as if she had been telling herself that for years. Telling herself that the lies, the silence, the unspoken pain were all just part of the larger picture of family life. But Lila wasn't buying it anymore. She wasn't going to let her mother hide behind the veil of self-righteousness that she had built up over the years. "No, Mom," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "It wasn't just for us. It wasn't just about protecting the family. It was about keeping secrets. It was about protecting his reputation. It was about keeping everything perfect on the outside while everything inside was falling apart." But Carol flinched as if Lila's words were a slap to the face. But Lila wasn't finished, not yet. "I don't understand," Lila continued, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me what was going on? Why didn't you tell me the truth about what happened between Dad and Evelyn?" For a long time, Carol said nothing. She just stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her gaze averted. It was as if the weight of Lila's questions had paralyzed her, rendering her speechless. Finally, Carol spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to think less of your father. I didn't want you to know that he wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect, Lila. He wasn't always the man you thought he was." Lila's chest tightened as her mother's words sank in. For years, she had believed in the idealized version of her father, the man who had never faltered, who had always done right by his family. But that man had been a mask that her mother had carefully constructed and maintained, just as she had maintained the illusion of their perfect family. "He made mistakes," Carol continued, her voice shaky now. "But he was always trying to make things right. He was trying to protect you, Lila. Protect all of us. And I couldn't bring myself to tell you. I couldn't break the image of him in your eyes. You needed him to be the way you saw him. I needed you to see him that way, too. It was easier that way." Lila stared at her mother, her heart breaking with each word. She could see it now. The weight of Carol's burden, the role she had played in perpetuating the lies. But there was something more there, too, something deeper. Her mother wasn't just protecting her father's memory. She was protecting herself, protecting her own heart from the painful reality of what had happened between David and Evelyn. She had spent so many years burying the truth, convincing herself that it was better left forgotten, that it was better left unspoken. But Lila had uncovered it all, and now there was no escaping it. "You don't get it, do you?" Lila said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't get that I needed you to be honest with me. I needed you to tell me the truth, because now I feel like everything we've ever had, everything we've ever been, is a lie. And I don't know how to deal with that." Tears welled up in Carol's eyes, and she finally looked at her daughter, truly looked at her for the first time in years. "I'm sorry, Lila," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for you to feel that way. I just didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to tell you." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Lila could feel the tension between them, the unspoken words that had been building for years. For the first time, she understood that her mother, too, had been a victim in this situation. She had lived in the shadows of her husband's secrets, just as Lila had. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. The damage had been done. And now, they were left to pick up the pieces. "Maybe I don't know how to forgive you, Mom," Lila said quietly, her voice raw. "Maybe I don't know how to forgive any of it, but I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. I can't keep living in this lie." Carol nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Lila. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth. I've been hiding from it for too long. I'm sorry." Lila looked at her mother, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had just spoken about. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy, but it was the first time in years that they had truly acknowledged the hurt that had been buried beneath the surface. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward healing. The silence that filled the room after that moment of raw honesty was more profound than anything Lila had experienced before. It wasn't the kind of silence that came with avoidance or unspoken grudges. It was the kind that followed a painful but necessary truth, a silence that felt heavy with the weight of all the years that had been spent in the dark. Lila sat on the couch, her head leaning against the backrest, as her mother stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The late afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. The world outside seemed to continue on, indifferent to the storm that had just passed between mother and daughter. But inside, it felt like the world had shifted. Lila wasn't sure what to feel anymore. A part of her still wanted to lash out, to scream at her mother for keeping the truth from her for so long. But another part of her understood the reasons behind it. Her mother had been trying to protect her, just as her father had. They had both been trying to shield her from pain, from the ugly realities that lay beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect family. But in doing so, they had only created more pain, more confusion. And now, there was no way to undo the damage. "Mom," Lila said softly, breaking the silence, "do you ever think about how different things could have been if Dad had just been honest with you, with all of us?" Carol turned away from the window, her face etched with sorrow. "Every day," she said quietly. "I wonder what would have happened if we had faced the truth together, if we had dealt with the things that were wrong instead of burying them. But what's the point in wondering now? It's done. We can't change the past." Lila nodded, understanding the sentiment but feeling a knot in her chest. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could be shaped, even if it meant facing the uncomfortable truths that had been left unspoken for so long. And in that moment, Lila realized that the journey to healing for both of them, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward. "We can't change the past," Lila said, her voice gaining strength. "But we can change how we live now. We can stop pretending that everything is fine. We can face what's broken and fix it. Together." Her words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as if they were taking root in the space between them. Carol didn't speak immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, as though weighing the decision to finally allow herself to move beyond the walls she had built around her emotions. And then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's time to stop pretending. I've spent so many years hiding from the truth from myself. But I can't keep living like this. I owe it to you, to your father's memory, to finally face everything we've been running from." Lila felt a rush of emotion as she heard her mother speak those words. It wasn't forgiveness that she sought. Not yet, anyway. But the acknowledgement that they both needed to change, to rebuild what had been broken. It was the beginning of something new, something fragile but necessary. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt the weight on her chest begin to lift, even if only a little. "I don't know if I can forgive him yet," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I think I can start to understand him. And I think I can forgive you. Not today, not right now, but someday. I know it won't be easy, but we have to try." Carol's face softened, and she walked over to Lila, sitting down beside her on the couch. "I don't expect you to forgive me today or tomorrow. But I'm here, Lila. I'm here, and I'm ready to make things right. As best as I can." They sat together in silence for a while longer, both lost in their thoughts, both aware of the enormity of what had just transpired. But there was also something new in the air. Something hopeful. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from naive optimism or wishful thinking. It was a quiet, steadfast hope that came from the willingness to face the truth, no matter how painful, and to move forward from there. Over the next few weeks, things didn't change overnight. Lila didn't suddenly feel at peace, and Carol didn't immediately shed the weight of all the years of silence. But they began to talk more openly, to confront the things they had buried for so long. Lila found herself asking her mother more questions, ones she had never dared to ask before. And slowly, Carol began to answer them. Honestly, without the walls she had spent so many years building around herself. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, moments when the past seemed too heavy to bear. But there were also moments of healing, moments when the conversations between them began to feel less like a confrontation and more like a bridge being built, one stone at a time. Lila also began to understand that the process of forgiveness wasn't linear. It wasn't something that could be done in a single moment, or even in a few weeks. It would take time. Months, maybe years. But that was okay. She didn't need to have all the answers right away. What mattered was that she was willing to walk the path, however long it might take. The biggest breakthrough came one evening when Lila found herself sitting with Carol in the living room, flipping through old photo albums. They hadn't done something like this in years. Lila had always associated the albums with nostalgia, memories of simpler times before the secrets had come to light. But now, as they flipped through the pages together, Lila began to see them in a new light. Each photo, each memory, was a part of the story that had shaped them, for better or for worse. And for the first time, she saw those photos not as a reminder of what had been lost, but as a testament to the resilience they still had. "Do you remember this?" Carol asked, pointing to a picture of Lila as a child standing proudly beside her father at a family gathering. Lila smiled faintly. "I remember that day. It was before I knew, before everything changed." But Carol's expression softened. "I know, Lila. I know. But that doesn't mean the love we had was any less real. Even in the midst of everything that happened, we loved each other. And we loved you. You were always our first priority." The words didn't heal everything. They didn't fix the years of silence or the pain that still lingered. But they were a start. A real start. Weeks turned into months, and while the past still loomed large, it no longer had the power to define them. Lila found herself visiting Evelyn more often, learning about the woman who had once been so important to her father. She didn't know where that relationship would go, but she had come to realize that the truth wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about understanding the people who had shaped her life, even if it meant accepting the painful reality of who they had been. Lila had finally stopped running. She had stopped running from the truth, from the past, and from the broken pieces of her family. She understood now that healing wasn't about fixing everything. It was about accepting what had happened, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Not perfect, but enough. As the years passed, Lila found herself returning to Eldridge less and less, not out of anger or resentment, but because she had built a new life, one that didn't rely on the ghosts of the past. She had learned to forgive, not just her parents, but herself. The weight of the secrets had finally been lifted, and with it came a sense of freedom she hadn't known she needed. In the end, Lila realized that the real healing came not from erasing the past, but from accepting it for what it was. It was a messy, complicated, beautiful thing, and it had shaped her into who she was. And for the first time in a long time, Lila was okay with that. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.